Good morning and welcome to Fox News. I'm Sean Hannity.
And I'm Tucker Carlson.
Over the past few days, Congress has been proposing some questionable but mostly strong bills around the topics of climate change, human trafficking, and the opioid crisis.
The first topic that was discussed was human trafficking. Human trafficking is a very important issue, especially in states with large immigrant populations, including California, Texas, and Georgia.
There were many horrendous bills presented by the Democrats, but I still think that there were many well-thought and well-made ones represented by the Republicans.
I think one of the most questionable bills that was presented was by Senator Kamala Harris. Though the bill itself says one thing, she contradicts herself, which is never something you want in a reliable senator. Her bill says that 50% of the money traffickers get go to nonprofits to help the trafficking victims, but what she presented says different.
And I propose that the 50% of the amount of money that traffickers are paying, because if they are traffickers and in court once they are kind of in court, 50% of their profits will go to the nonprofit organization to help the traffickers.
Personally, my favorite bill was one presented by our own Andy Harris. He created the ingenious idea to keep the victims of traffickers anonymous so that they could participate in court. This keeps them safe and wanting to participate more in the trial. Of course, the intelligence that comes from taking money for funds from the EPA is second to only our fine president himself, because this agency is not using their money very efficiently.
Thankfully, we have Mr. Harris over on the phone with us today to answer some of our burning questions.
Thank you, Representative Harris, for joining us today.
Thank you, Representative Harris, for joining us today. We would just like to ask you a few questions on human trafficking. So first, can you tell us a little bit about your bill?
Yeah, so my bill is supposed to give an option to human trafficking victims to remain anonymous throughout the prosecution process if they desire as such.
What are some of your thoughts on the other bills that were presented?
I think they're all pretty solid bills. I know that all of them got passed through the House. Yeah, they're all pretty solid.
They all actually get passed. Even Sam's?
Yeah, I
Don't put the Okay. Sam is Democrat because he went second.
Were there any bills that you were surprised about being passed?
I was surprised that
It's not in here. I don't know either. His bill?
What was your bill on?
surprised that Representative Schakowsky's bill was passed, but we'll see how it gets through the Senate and the House in our committees happening tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We'll see.
And of course, our fine president can always veto the bill if needed.
That's right.
And now I think we'll ask you a few questions about your own bill, if that's all right with you.
Okay.
So you think, I think one of my favorite parts of your bill is how $4 billion how funds will come from the EPA. Is that right?
That's right.
I think that's an excellent way to receive money. What made you choose the EPA to receive funds from?
I don't think the EPA spends their money effectively because obviously I don't think climate change is a huge deal for our society, if it is a problem at all. So I think that money needs to be redirected.
Great, thank you. Why do you think these victims need the option to be anonymous in this court, in this trial?
I think that a lot of cases of human trafficking don't get reported because that the victims feel like there's going to be backlash from either the person they're prosecuting or their cohorts, and so I think that this option allows a lot more safety for the victims in that they'll feel a lot more safe coming forward with their case.
Of course. Of course, the safety of the victims is always first. You know?
That's right.
Do you have any questions? No? All right.
Class is gonna go in 5 minutes.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you for your time, Mr. Harris.
Of course.
And thank you for answering our questions.
Of course. Glad
We hope your bill is passed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next issue that was discussed was the opioid crisis. This could be known as the worst drug epidemic in American history. Opioids are painkillers that depress the central nervous system and are found profoundly addictive.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi presented on an opening statement for the issue. Here's some footage from that day. Take a look.
Today we convene in San Mateo, California to discuss what has become of our country's leadership. We stand here in imperfect union because we are no longer a union. We are divided in a time where togetherness is the only way things will change. We, the Democratic Party, represent the working man, the people who earn their money and who have the most to lose. We represent immigrants who have fought for better lives for their families. We represent women who have fought and are still fighting to get the same basic courtesies as their male counterparts. We represent the LGBT community, whose rights are still at risk. To them and to you, we make our pledge to protect your hard work and not allow those who would risk your freedoms for their personal gain to destroy all that we have worked for. To them, you are but a prophet, but to us, you are a human being. You hold your own value and we serve to protect that.
These bills were certainly ones to debate from both sides, but I think that the ones that were most developed were presented by the Republicans, which is why none of the Democratic bills were passed.
Although I agree with the ones that got passed, except one, we asked Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein on her thoughts of the bills passed in committee.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein, for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Feinstein, for joining us today. To start off, can you please explain your bill?
Yes, so my bill requires that the federal government subsidize the rehabilitation process of opioid addiction. This will be done by lowering the average cost of rehabilitation for both inpatient and outpatient individuals. The bill will be enacted as a pilot program before being up for reevaluation once the trial run is over. The pilot program will work to see if there is an increase in opioid abusers when the cost of treatment is lowered. It will be effective in the states West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, and New Mexico, in the whole state for 4 years. It will be funded by introducing a 2% tax on the sale of opioids produced by pharmaceutical drug manufacturers. Yeah.
Great, thank you. What are your thoughts on the other bills presented by both Republicans and Democrats?
I think that we all worked really well to create bills that were somewhat bipartisan. I feel like most of our bills had the same goals, yet I think what kept us apart was things such as funding or certain parts of ideology that were different. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how none of the Democratic bills were passed?
I think that was surprising due to the fact that I think our bills would have made a difference and they were important, and I think that the Republican bills were very much so, at least some of them were very much so Republican, and so I think that it was not necessarily fair that none of the Democratic bills were passed, because I feel like both of the Democratic bills, other than funding, were pretty bipartisan. Yeah.
Seeing that all the bills were pretty bipartisan and pretty like both sides and would help the world and such, why do you why do you think that none of the Democratic bills were passed? Like, why do you believe that this happened?
I know that my bill wasn't passed because the funding was coming from taxes, which is something that most Republicans are against. I don't really know why the second bill by Miss O'Rourke, I believe her name is, wasn't passed, because her bill was very much so bipartisan, because it was just kind of educating patients about prescription drugs and about what they are being prescribed, and so I'm not quite sure why that one didn't get passed.